Hi, I'm Susanna Self. I'm the instructor of flute at Eastern New Mexico University, and today in this video we're going to talk about rhythm and counting. So this video is going to be divided into two parts. One, we're going to talk about some of the fundamentals of counting and go over some more challenging rhythms like dotted notes, tied notes, and syncopation. And then in the second part, I'm going to play an excerpt that has these different rhythms in it so you can see them in practice. So why is rhythm important? It's something that we can all feel together. If you're playing in an ensemble or with an accompanist or even in an audition by yourself, you're going to be playing for somebody, and that shared sense of pulse is something that can connect everyone, and it keeps an audience listening and enables you to play well with other people. So how do we play in rhythm? Well, first of all, you'll want to take a look at the piece without your flute and take a look at where the big beats are. You'll want to find where 1, 2, 3, and 4 are if we're in 4/4 time. And then after you've found where the big beats are and how those line up with the notes, then you want to find where the off beats are, so that you make sure that wherever those notes are, that's lining up for you with your subdivisions. So once I go through a piece and I have somewhat of a grasp of the notes and the rhythms, I'll use a metronome. Having a metronome is a big help for learning to play with a very steady sense of pulse. If you play very slowly and learn it accurately, it saves you time later on not having to unlearn mistakes. The third thing that is very important in counting is subdivision. If you have dotted notes, tied notes, or held notes, you want to make sure that while you're playing those notes that you have a continual sense of the smaller beat that is happening, rather than just holding the note, forgetting where you are, and then not being able to come in accurately afterwards. So in this first part of the video, as I said, we're going to go over some fundamentals. If you're having a difficult time with rhythm, I can recommend that you go online and get some practice rhythm sheets. They have practice rhythm sheets in 4/4 or in 6/8, different time signatures that will help you practice just learning rhythms at sight. By being able to do that, you sight read better, you can learn new pieces easier, and you do well in auditions. So we're going to be dealing with rhythms in 4/4 time today. 4/4 is 1 4 on top of another 4. The top 4 means how many beats there are in that measure. The bottom number means what note gets the beat. So for 4/4 time, there are 4 beats in the measure, and 4 or a quarter note gets the beat. So looking at this chart, let's look at the middle line that's all quarter notes. You'll notice that each quarter note is comprised of 2 eighth notes or 4 16th notes. You'll also see that a half note takes 2 quarter notes, which means it's 2 beats, and a whole note takes all 4 quarter notes, or is 4 beats. Now this is important to get these basics before moving on to more complicated rhythms like dotted notes, tied notes, and syncopation. So first let's go over dotted notes. You'll see here on the screen that we have a quarter note that equals 2 eighth notes. Now when you add a dot to the end of the note, that adds half the value of the note. Since you see that a quarter note equals 2 eighth notes, then half of that is 1 eighth note. So you'll add 1 eighth note to the 2 eighth notes. That gives you 3 eighth notes worth, or a dotted quarter note. This is very important to see how the subdivision works for dotted notes as well as tied notes and syncopation so that you can count through them accurately. So if you're looking at a dotted quarter note, you might think that has 3/8 notes in it. You can play the 3/8 notes and then tie them together. So for tied notes, speaking of ties, it acts the same way. You want to take a look at the note values that are tied together, and if one value is different than the other one especially, you maybe want to subdivide that greater value so that you know how many beats are in that note. So let's take a look at the example here. We have a quarter note tied to a half note. So let's take that half note and divide it up into 2 quarters. You'll have 1 quarter plus the 2 quarters, which equals 3 beats. So you can play those 3 beats separately to get a feel for how long that is, and then just tie them together. And you have your 3 beats tied together while you're subdividing. So lastly, let's look at syncopation. Syncopation is when the emphasis or the articulation is put on a weak beat and the strong beat doesn't have any articulation at all. So if you look at the example we have here, you'll see 4/8 notes, 2 of which in the middle are tied. The example next to that shows that those 2 tied 1/8 notes are actually a quarter note. That is more likely what you're going to see in music. In order to be able to count that, once again, it helps to subdivide. So take that quarter note, divide it into those 2/8 notes, maybe even take the tie out so that you can hear those 2 beats. And then, after you've got that feeling for the subdivision, tie those 2 beats together, sorry, not beats, but 2/8 notes together, and then you have the example as it's written, with syncopation on. So here we are to the second part of the video where we're going to show all these rhythms we've talked about in practice. I'm going to play an excerpt from Philippe Gaubert's Madrigal. It's a beautiful piece that has all 3 rhythms that we've talked about: dotted notes, tied notes, and syncopation. So in the first 2 measures of this excerpt, you'll notice there are several dotted quarter notes. Each dotted quarter, as we've learned, contains 3/8 notes. When you tie those 1/8 notes together, it sounds like a dotted quarter. However, right now, we're going to separate those 3/8 notes so that we have the subdivision very clear. Then you might want to tie those notes, but impulse them. So that way you're still really feeling the pulse. Once you do this with a metronome, and pulsing, feeling the subdivision enough to where you just feel it, then play it normally, and you're more likely to get off the dot onto the and of 2 and of 4 in time. A lot of times when people are late in music, it's often because they're late off a dotted note or a tied note or a syncopation. And that's often because they can't feel the strong beat. Practicing in this way helps make sure you do feel where the strong beats are. The next example we have is of a syncopation. So we have an eighth note, a quarter note, an eighth note, and then another quarter. That first quarter note is going to be on a weak beat. So I'm going to break it down into 2 eighth notes and make sure that subdivision is very clear. Now I'm going to tie those 2 eighth notes together. Then you have the example as written. So in this last excerpt, we have a syncopation and a tied note. This tied note is a long held note. And a lot of times my students, or I hear in auditions, don't hold notes as long as they're supposed to, which is especially a problem if you have music that's continuing afterwards. You want to make sure to feel that sense of pulse and subdivision while you're holding the note so that you end it at the right time. First, I'm going to play the first 2 bars, and I'm going to subdivide on that quarter note those 2 eighth notes. But at the end, for the long B natural, I'm going to play quarter notes so that we know we have a whole note, which is 4 quarters, a half note, which is 2 quarters, 4 plus 2, that's going to be 6 beats long. Now I'm going to tie that all together and just feel that sense of pulse underneath. I hope you found this video helpful. Remember, it's very important to use a metronome and feel the subdivision underneath the notes so that you're playing in time. It will help you in every audition and in every ensemble performance that you do. Good luck and happy practicing.